中国现在投资他们的军队投资在什么地方呢？他们最大的一部分的钱是放在航母。This is costing them enormous sums of money, hundreds of billions of dollars that they're sinking into these ships. Those ships are the heart of their strategy. And so I think they've made a mistake.
我是范琪斐，
我是路易莎莎，
欢迎收看《匪夷所思》。好，那今天我们阿姨想知道，我们请到一个非常大咖，而且真的非常难邀的一个来宾 ，OK？ 因为我们真的跟他约很久，我们跟他约很久哦，约了一年多有了哈。从疫情约到现在这样子，就是那个非常有名的美国的前国家安全的副顾问博明。那博明简历我还是交给路易莎莎来介绍。
博明先生呢，其实有非常多的经验哦，他待过这个北京，在北京当过记者。那其实也跟随过美军实际参与战争，然后他又回到了华尔街，也做一些金融相关工作。但大家最为人所知的是，他曾经在川普任内担任过这个副国家安全顾问。那大家其实可以观察到，就是川普政府其实在对中国政策真的硬起来的背后，这些人啊，包含其实就除了 Mike Pompeo 以外，其实还包含就是博明跟这个余茂春先生。那这也是他之所以很有名，然后我们也一直很希望采访他的一个原因。
对，那个博明哦，其实说实在，你在听他的论述里面哦，我就觉得他的这些经历来讲，就是让他的这个他的论述非常的有说服力哦。你看他又有新闻界，所以他很会讲嘛哈。然后呢，他又陆战队打过仗 ，OK， 然后后来又当过官嘛哈。所以说，我觉得就是他这些经历的整合，让他的论述哦，感觉真的是觉得非常非常的很有说服力。那他这次来台湾，最重要就是因为他写了一本书，叫做
The Boiling
Moat 这样，他今天早上还问我说，中文翻哪一个比较好？OK， 那他主要这本书就是在讲说，这个台湾我们如果要加强我们的国防的话，应该要怎么样做这样子。那我们为了要采访他嘛，所以之前他在台湾有一个论坛，那我还特地去听他演讲这样子。那它其实最重要的一个观念就在讲 deterrence 这个概念。那如果有看我们行动代号2027系列的朋友，应该就对这个 deterrence 就威慑这个概念应该是不陌生啦哈。那基本上就是说，你如果呢什么都不做，很衰弱的话，才是会邀请战争。这种状态之下才是会让人家更想打你这样子，
因为打你不痛
嘛哈，所以说你一定要把打你的这个代价拉得很高，那他才会不敢打这样子。所以他这本书其实最重要就在讲这个 deterrence 的这个概念，还有要怎么样做。OK， 好，那其实我在听他演讲的时候，我其实就有一个疑问了哈。所以我们当然都知道，我们是要避战的话，就要备战嘛。我想现在很多人有这个观念了，可问题是他在演讲里面他有讲到一个，他这样子形容，他就说你如果要达到威慑的这个效果的话，你是必须要把自己变得是。有时候是 uncomfortably strong 就是你要把自己变得很强壮，而且这个强壮的状况有时候甚至会让你觉得不大舒服这样子。OK， 好。可是我的疑问就是说，你在一个不大舒服的很强壮的状态之下，就是你保持一个这个很不舒服的姿态，你是没有办法保持很久的。OK， 所以今天你要保持一个 uncomfortably strong 一个很长期的时间，我觉得这个会有点问题一个长期策略来讲会有问题。然后另外一个就政治上真的很不受欢迎啊，因为现在我们在讲国防的时候，有时候我们跟年轻朋友在讲的时候，很多年轻朋友第一个反应就是说，我现在眼前的问题都没有办法解决，我薪资这么低 ，OK， 我觉得我房子买不起，我的生活本身就很痛苦，你根本不要跟我讲国防的事，我听很烦。所以我觉得在政治上就是它就是一个非常不受欢迎的一个政策，所以这个事情在政治上要怎么解决，这是我第一个问题。第二个问题就是说，好，威慑这件事情，其实在冷战时期，也就是二次世界大战之后，其实变成一个非常主流的思维哈。比如说这个冷战期间，这个美俄之间为什么要军事竞赛，其实就是这个原因嘛哈。然后可是这一次以色列的状况，就让我对这个威慑这个事情我有一点问号，因为以色列就是 practice 这个威慑 deterrence 这个策略，他非常忠心的，非常他们以色列就是长期在执行这个政策的，所以他们把自己的军力养得很强大，这样结果养得很强大的结果，就哈马斯还打啦。那 那时候很多专家就在问啊，他就说这个威慑这个概念是不是在现在社会里面，在现代 modern warfare 里面，是不是有点过时啦？是不是要多想一想，比如说外交管道啊这些策略这样子？所以我也想问问博明他这方面的想法。那另外一个就是潜舰了哈，潜舰。那我在听他演讲的时候呢，他就有讲到这个书里面就有个章节，就是台湾发展潜舰这件事情，其实呢这本书是不赞成的，但是当时他是交给他的 co-author 就是那个 Ivan 去来阐述说为什么他们不赞成。那博明自己没有讲很多，所以我希望今天在访谈里面他可以多讲一点，就是说为什么不赞成台湾发展潜舰。好，那路易莎莎最想问他什么？
好，范就讲很多，快长话短说。第一个就是很多人讲说为这本书在讲台湾，他其实讲了很多这个包含日本该怎么做啊，澳洲该怎么做。但我的问题是，这个第一岛链上有这么多点，那为什么一定要是台湾？不能是中南海吗？不能是其他任何点吗？为什么会是台湾这个点会是他认为必须要加强戒备的地方？这是第一件事情。然后第二件事情是，其实我们在讲到这个威慑，然后再讲到军事的时候，很多人都说，那你释出善意啊，你不要在用威慑的情况之下，然后把这个东西弄得很像是一个挑衅啊，为什么不能用外交的途径来解决？那外交途径是不是一个能够解决两岸问题的一个途径？那包含这个可能也是很多反对党或是反对声音认为这是一个我们应该要走的路线，
我们要加强的路线，
我们要跟中国好好的对话。那有对话有善意，那这样子就不会打。那我想问问看博明他是怎么想的？好，那最后一个问题是，其实博明先生其实在川普任内服务4年嘛，那当然他在那个当初 January 6th 那个时候的这个暴动之后他就辞职了，所以很明显的他应该是不会再进到川普第2任政府里面。但是我们很好奇的是，其实以川普这样子一个我们可以说举棋啊反复不定这样的一个状态，那我想知道，如果川普当选了，那他的对台政策或是对中政策下的台湾政策会不会有所谓的改变跟影响？
对啊，不管怎么样，他还是在川普下面做了4年嘛，我想应该比大部分的人应该都比较能够了解吧川普的这个想法这样子。那接下来我们再来听博明怎么说吧。博明先跟我们观众打个招呼。
你们好，非常感谢今天能来参加。
这次我们先讲一讲好了，这次来台湾的心得怎么样？
So I was very lucky. I got to meet with President Lai, with his new national security team. I have met with some of the members at the 立法院, including from the opposition party, 国民党. And have come away with the view that Taiwan has just had another very successful transfer of power. This is a mature democracy that sometimes I'm very envious of too.
Now let's come back to your book. So I think in this book, a very important topic is about to deter China. So tell us why we have to do that. Why do we have to deter China?
Yeah, well, any free society that does not want to be bullied or even ultimately controlled by an aggressive neighbor should choose deterrence as their strategy. And deterrence is the things that you need to do to deter an enemy are very heavily overlapping with the things that you would need to do to defeat an aggressor. And so it is a cheaper way of protecting oneself than having to actually fight. So deterrence means really achieving a psychological effect, right? It's like making the whole society, a 心理医生 that you're trying to persuade an aggressor, a bully, that it would be a very grave mistake to actually attack.
But why deter China, though? Because China has been saying that they have been rising peacefully. So why can't we just take his word for that?
Yeah. I remember that old phrase, a peaceful rise. 和平崛起。现在没有很多人提这个和平崛起，现在是个开玩笑。If you look at what China has been doing, Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party has been doing just in the last few years alone, It is the action of an aggressive, malign, belligerent dictatorship. There's nothing peaceful about it. I'll give some examples. Russia, the Russian dictator visited Xi Jinping for the opening day of the Olympics in Beijing just 2 years ago in early 2022. They signed a pact, what they called a no limits pact with one another. And Putin left Beijing, and in less than 3 weeks, he launched the biggest war in Europe since World War II. And then it was only the following year, in October of 2023, that the terrorist group Hamas, backed by, trained by, and funded by Iran, attacked Israel. And China is the #1 supporter of Iran and is providing diplomatic support, propaganda support against Israel, against the United States, and also is the #1 material supporter of Iran because China is the main customer for sanctioned Iranian oil. Now, Xi Jinping is bullying the Philippines. He's bullying Taiwan with these aggressive exercises, and he's even beginning to play around in the Caribbean.
Caribbean too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
In a couple of ways. And by the way, it's together with Iran and Russia again also. So Iran is providing weapons to the dictator in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, including attack boats with missiles. The Russians are there providing advice and intelligence gathering support. And China is the #1 diplomatic and propaganda and material supporter for Maduro's regime. And Maduro is now threatening to invade his neighbor, Guyana. So again, there's this term revanchism. Revanchism. When we talk about revanchist dictatorships, it means dictatorships that want to engage in revenge. They want to take territory. They want to take territory even if they didn't ever control that territory. 中华人民共和国当然 has never 历史上所有 all these years has never controlled Taiwan, right? So they concoct grievances and start to commit aggression. So in the Caribbean, we're seeing threats of aggression with the support of Beijing. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We're seeing Beijing directly threatening the Philippines and Taiwan. Mm-hmm. So that is why we have to deter. Otherwise, they'll just keep coming. They'll take and take unless they encounter something hard.
Can you tell us why is it, when the Chinese naval base, reach into the West Pacific is a big deal?
At the end of World War II, after Japan was defeated, the American General Douglas MacArthur wrote an important memo, a memorandum to Washington, D.C. He explained all the way back then in that memo what would happen, if Taiwan became a colony again of an aggressive power. If it were a colony again, it would actually damage the security of the whole region. This time, instead of it being Japan, of course, it's the People's Republic of China under Xi Jinping. And if you read some of the doctrine, the military books in China, they talk about Taiwan as a military base, a future military base by which China can threaten all of the region. They talk about breaking the first island chain, submarines, including nuclear weapons submarines, bombers, aircraft. They write about how this would allow China to threaten a blockade of other countries in the region, including Japan, of course, also Korea, of course, also the Philippines and beyond. So they view it as a strategically important piece of geography. And so this isn't just about this concocted sort of historical grievance. It's really about geostrategy. It's a way to ensure that they have unfettered access deep into the Pacific in order to threaten and coerce other democracies in the region besides Taiwan.
All these allies like Japan, Philippines, and Taiwan, nobody wants to be the flashpoint.
Yeah.
So do we have to be the flashpoint?
Well, Beijing will choose the softest target. It's like the old saying, 打七寸, right? They're going to look for the country that they think will be strategically located to allow them to move past the island chain. And China has selected Taiwan, not the United States, not Japan. Taiwan itself has not inaugurated itself to be a flashpoint. And it also believes that Taiwan, the existence of Taiwan as a democracy is a threat to the Chinese Communist Party. It views that as a threat because it has succeeded in building a prosperous, safe, and extremely free society that practices rule of law, has a constitutional democracy. The mere existence of a successful democratic society on Taiwan is viewed as a threat because it reminds the Chinese people of the illegitimacy of their government. It reminds the Chinese Communist Party of its own inherent illegitimacy. Do you remember when this last election, President Lai won with what was his ultimate percentage of the vote? About 40%?
40%, yeah.
So I remember the Chinese government began to say, he didn't get a majority of the vote. So he doesn't, maybe he's not a legitimate president because he only got 40% of the vote. I thought to myself, what percentage of the Chinese people elected Xi Jinping?
Exactly.
0. I know people in Taiwan don't want this, this burden of being a flashpoint. But as Vladimir Lenin used to say, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. This is a Leninist dictatorship that wants to destroy free societies because free societies remind their people and their government of their inherent illegitimacy.
Is that deterrence is the only way? You said that, for deterrence to be effective, you have to be uncomfortably strong. And then being uncomfortably strong for a very long time is very exhausting. And also politically extremely unpopular. We saw Israel has been practicing this deterrence forever. However, they still got attacked. I have to think, is it really that effective?
Yeah, sometimes, aggressors will still attack sometimes, right? Israel had a surprise attack against it. It was horrific. Ultimately, it could have been much, much, much worse than it was if Israel had not been fairly prepared and if Israel had not been able to mobilize as quickly as it did. Those attackers would have kept going. I think there were maps that were recovered on the bodies of some of the attackers showing that they had plans to go much farther than they did. Ultimately, it was a fairly localized area that they attacked. They took hostages. They went back. Many of the attackers were killed. And war is a fact of life and of civilization. You have aggressive ideologies. You have bullies, terrorists, Leninist dictatorships. People fight wars, and democracies sometimes even initiate wars, as we've seen. Sometimes righteously, sometimes mistakenly. And so, would you rather be able to repel an attack? I would say that even though deterrence failed against Hamas, those attacks were repelled, and Hamas is now is being decimated in response. So they're being punished. This is sort of a deterrence by punishment now that's playing out there. deterrence is expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as having to fight, right? Wars are absolutely, I fought in 2 wars myself. They distort economies. They distort normal living patterns. They create enormous heartache in the form of loss and suffering and injury. The cost of having a free and democratic society is eternal vigilance. And how expensive is it really? How painful is it really to have to spend a bit more and to have to train a bit more for young Taiwan adults to have to do a longer bit of service in their conscription duty, 12 months. I think these are reasonable costs. What will be the cost to Taiwan society of living under the Chinese Communist Party's rule? Look at Hong Kong. That is not the kind of society that anyone that I know in Taiwan wants to live under.
But I think a lot of people are saying that since deterrence is very expensive, also there's a possibility to be translated by China as aggression, itself. And so I think a lot of people are saying that why can't we try more diplomacy?
Sure. Well, look, diplomacy only works if it's backed by credible hard power. So diplomacy is not a substitute for power. It is an instrument or a tool for trying to head off miscalculations and trying to find creative ways of dealing with disputes. But when you're dealing with a Leninist dictatorship, when you're dealing with a dictator like Xi Jinping, diplomacy is guaranteed to fail if it is not backed by capability and will to fight effectively. That's the way that you make diplomacy work. If Beijing becomes convinced that it can never successfully invade Taiwan, that a blockade of Taiwan would be self-destructive and would not force capitulation, then Beijing will be more receptive to creative diplomacy. But if they think that they can get away with that, then they will ignore the diplomacy and they will use the diplomacy to try to trick the Taiwan public.
So let's say I think a lot of people already now are very familiar with the ideas of deterrence, okay? And they say we agree on that too. So what do you think Taiwan has to do right now urgently so we could have really the effective deterrence?
Yeah. If Taiwan is able to resist an invasion, that means preventing the Chinese military from landing on Taiwan. They can cross much of the Taiwan Strait, but to go that next step to actually disembarking large amounts of soldiers and military equipment, as long as they can't do that, they are going to have a very, very difficult time subjugating Taiwan. So it is about acquiring the capabilities and training the military to use capabilities that can threaten the Chinese Navy. The good news is it's much more expensive to try to attack a country than it is to defend. You need fewer people, less equipment to defend territory than to take territory. When you're talking about an amphibious invasion crossing the Taiwan Strait, it's even more dramatic. China needs incredible amounts of ships and airplanes and helicopters and men and missiles to do that. Taiwan doesn't need to match those capabilities. It doesn't need to have a huge navy. It needs to have these asymmetric capabilities. There's a lot of confusion. What does asymmetric mean? It means capabilities that are cheaper, much cheaper, but also quite effective at low cost in threatening attackers. And so Taiwan is already moving in the right direction on this, but it needs much larger quantities of missiles anti-air, anti-ship, drones, these suicide drones that can attack, similar to what Russia has been using against the Ukrainians. It means having very good ability to communicate with the military and with the outside world through not only undersea cables. If those cables get cut by the People's Liberation Army, you want to have satellites available and lots of them so that the world can communicate with Taiwan and see what's happening. Taiwan can communicate and counter China's information warfare and disinformation. So these are the sorts of things. And then, of course, it's about remaining close with powerful friends. It's good to have powerful friends. Japan is the closest, but the United States military is present in Japan. You have Australia pretty close by. The Philippines, which is geographically situated in ways that can be helpful to Taiwan if U.S. troops are able to operate from the Philippines. So you start to see that there's a coalition effect, and Beijing clearly finds this coalition effect, the support of the United States, the possible support of Japan. I think Japan would definitely be involved in helping defend Taiwan. These things are very problematic for plans by the People's Liberation Army to invade. If they weren't problematic, China would have invaded Taiwan a long, long time ago. Deterrence right now is working. That's why Taiwan has remained free for 3/4 of a century.
Among all these weapons you just mentioned, I noticed that you didn't talk about submarines.
Yeah.
And then, we are actually building our own submarines right now. It's very controversial in Taiwan because it's very expensive. We are spending a lot more money than other people, than other countries who has submarines. So what do you think about the project?
Yeah. Look, I have a lot of sympathy for the project in the sense that other countries weren't willing to sell new equipment, submarines to Taiwan. Submarines, as a general rule, can be very, very effective. The problems that have been pointed out to me with respect to Taiwan submarines is that they may not be stealthy enough to be able to effectively evade detection. 中国现在投资他们的军队投资在什么地方呢？他们最大的一部分的钱是放在big warships，
大船
，yeah，航母，航母，
大吨位大的
，yeah， destroyers，frigates. These ships are old technology in a way, right? I mean, they're modern warships, but they are still old-fashioned platforms. This is costing them enormous sums of money, hundreds of billions of dollars that they're sinking into these ships. Those ships are the heart of their strategy. And so I think they've made a mistake. They have invested in capabilities that Taiwan, together with the US and Japan, can destroy those big, expensive warships with cheap weapons, anti-ship missiles, torpedoes, undersea drones, above the sea and in the sky drones. So they are on the wrong end of a cost curve where they are spending, cumulatively trillions of US dollars of equipment that can be destroyed for, hundreds of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. So that's what I mean by asymmetric. We can be clever. We can use the advantages of this technology because China can't take Taiwan with drones and bombs and missiles. It has to send men. Some things about war are new. Some things about war are timeless. And the timeless elements of war, of the nature of war, include the fact that if you want to control a society, if you want to conquer territory, men with rifles have to land and control and take territory and control the population that way. It's old-fashioned. Those aspects of war are unchanging. So actually, I think Taiwan has a big advantage. We should be optimistic about the fact that we can acquire capabilities that will defeat these dramatic big armadas of ships that Beijing has already spent its money on. Taiwan can find the Achilles heel, the Qicun in their system, and actually successfully repel an invasion with help from the United States and Japan and Australia.
So, do you suggest us to abandon the submarine projects altogether?
I don't.
Because it's so expensive.
Well, look, I don't feel as an outsider that I can tell Taiwan. I can give advice, and
but that's I think it's a reasonable conclusion, right?
Well, it's from your mouth.
Okay, from
it's a reasonable conclusion. Well, look, my colleague Ivan Kanapathy, who co-wrote some of the chapters of the book, believes that it should be abandoned, and that money should be repurposed to things like underwater unmanned submarines. We now know that autonomous weapons have debuted in this war in Ukraine in a major way. When we were fighting, I fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. We used drones, but it was much more of an incremental kind of capability in war. Now it is a major additional capability on the battlefield in Ukraine. So Taiwan would be able to acquire significant, fearsome capabilities at lower cost and without having to put its young men into those weapons. You can let computers steer, or people on shore steer these weapons to threaten Chinese ships without having to put the young men into those submarines to go wage war themselves. So undersea capabilities, I wonder whether Taiwan would have the ability to actually convert to more undersea drones that can be very, very dangerous. On the surface of the ocean, you can also do unmanned surface vehicles, which are small surface ships that are fast, don't have people on them, but have a lot of explosives on them and can sink big, expensive warships. And then, of course, the drones up in the skies above. One of the key criterion of asymmetric is that it has to be affordable. It has to be affordable, as well as lethal and effective. Those are the criterion. As my friend Li Ximing has been very eloquent in his writing and in his conversations in explaining, there's 真的不对称的这些武器跟假的不对称的这些武器，真的不对称的武器 has to be affordable.
Yeah. OK. 好，那现在我们在讲，就是说，你觉得我们现在这个军事改革做得怎么样？
这个
你觉得我们改得快吗？够不够快？
我看蔡总统是好像是2022年底做了一个很勇敢的一个改革，就是你要做这个 conscription service 必须做12个月，4个月不够了。I think that was a very good move. Do you remember 他做了这个改革之前，你如果有一个 poll 看台湾人觉得做这个就是延长这个 conscription 的时间的话 ，popular 还是不 popular?
Actually, let me put this way: it's not as unpopular as I thought it would be.
Yes, 这是我的意思，就是很多人说啊，为什么要做这个呢？然后他就解释了，说我们必须做这个改革，而且有很多的原因 ，and afterwards 有很多人就支持了这个政策，那就是 leadership, doing something hard, explaining it to the people, having good reasons for doing it, and then trusting and having faith in the people that they will support a sensible policy. And the opposition party supported it. The people of Taiwan supported it. As long as the training is good and effective, those young men who are going in to do that training will also support it. History will show that this was a very good step. Now, we write in chapter 4 of the book about some of the other things that we think need to happen. We think that it's important to promote leaders in the military who are committed to making these hard decisions to acquire capabilities, to train effectively, train hard. And sometimes that means going further down the chain of command and promoting younger officers faster. This is always very controversial in any military, but it's often necessary. President Eisenhower, when World War II started, in fact, it was in 1941, early 1941, several months before Pearl Harbor, but still in that same year, he was only a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, a lieutenant colonel. That's only one rank above what I was when I was a U.S. Marine. I was a major when I finished my military service. He became a 5-star general over the course of that war. So he was rapidly promoted. He was selected by General Marshall, who knew him and said, this is a guy with immense talent. And in wartime, the people who have the talent that is suitable for wartime often are different from the generals that are really good in peacetime. And so Marshall said, we need wartime generals. And so many of these younger officers were promoted rapidly. And that made a huge difference. It allowed the United States to ultimately prevail against the Axis powers in World War II. So I think Taiwan should have a similar mentality. So I think keeping an eye on junior officers who would be effective in wartime would be the kinds of leaders that should be rapidly promoted in the Taiwan Armed Forces. And they can make a lot of these changes. You can delegate the changes down the chain of command, but only if you have really effective leaders who have vision, clarity of mind about what needs to be done for the single critical mission of deterring, or if necessary, defeating an attack by China.
But the pace, but what I'm talking about is the pace of reform.
Yeah.
Do you think it's too slow, especially from Washington, D.C.'s point of view?
I'm
always like rumors circling, we have this progress. It's maybe not as much as we like it to be, but without, a lot of people are saying it's actually from the American pressure. So we would do this. So I don't know, is there any truth to this rumor?
That the changes happen because of American pressure?
Yep.
Well, look, in the book, I reserve my biggest criticism for the United States. Okay, 骂我自己的国家 in the book about I'm impatient about the degree of the pace of reform in the U.S. military and also in the U.S. defense industrial base. So I think I would like to see Taiwan and the United States and Japan speed up the reforms that I think we're already moving in the right direction. All three countries are moving in the right direction. I visited Japan this week. I met with the minister, with various ministers in Japan and people across their national security establishment. They're doing really brave, excellent reforms. They're increasing their defense spending. They're doing more training and closer integration with the United States. We're talking now about having a joint command that gets stood up in where a U.S. senior general would be working side by side with his Japanese counterpart to actually do operational control of not just administrative control, but operational control of their joint militaries. So there are very good things happening. I don't want to make it sound like we're not doing anything. We're moving in the right direction, but it needs to be faster. It needs to be faster than the sorts of plans that Xi Jinping is putting into place. In 4 speeches last year, 去年3月所谓两会的时候，习近平发表了4个文章，说我们要准备斗争 to fight wars 打战。So we should do the same. we aren't threatening China. Taiwan's not threatening China. No country is threatening China. China is threatening its neighbors and even countries on the other side of the world now. So it is incumbent upon us. We have a moral obligation to ourselves and to our citizens to prepare and prepare fast. Mm-hmm. It's not as costly and as expensive to do that as it is to fail to do that.
Okay, before we progress to talk about the politics in the United States, I'd like to talk about Philippines, the gray zone aggression, actually. I think, the gray zone aggression is such a headache right now for us. And then, but I'm seeing Philippines are doing differently in recent, after the new president being elected. Mm-hmm. He used this, is called transparency strategy. Mm. Is bring like reporters go to the sea and let them see the conflict, let them see what China is doing to Philippines. Do you think it's effective?
It is effective. It's not enough by itself, but it is a very effective technique. Ivan Kanapathy, my co-author and colleague when we worked together at the White House, calls it deterrence by detection. Deterrence by detection. What it means is showing China and showing the world that we see what you're doing. It's transparency, and that we are documenting what you're doing, videotaping it from drones or from sailors on ships, and exposing the activity for what it is, which is aggressive. The reason this is helpful is it denies Beijing the ability to lie about why a conflict started. Beijing knows there's no such thing as an accidental war, but they will pretend that they were attacked first, or they will pretend that what happened at sea or in the skies was different from what really played out. And so it's important to document that and show the world so that you maintain public support. The people in the Philippines they know that Beijing is an aggressive bully. Overwhelming support for President Marcos and the approach he's taking to defend his sovereignty, to defend the sovereignty of the Philippines. So I think it is very good. These are good tactics that can have a strategic effect. You still need to have hard power to back that up. But it reminds me, I mean, while we're talking about information warfare, we talked a little bit yesterday, remember, when we were chatting about the three warfares. Information warfare, 信息战, right? There's psychological warfare, and there's legal warfare. These are warfares that Beijing is waging. I think that the most dangerous one is the 信息战, right? And the best weapon Beijing has for waging information warfare against Taiwan is TikTok. TikTok is pure poison. And I don't know if your listeners know, I was very sad to hear today that TikTok is becoming more popular.
Very popular.
This is a huge mistake. You cannot be a successful citizen of a free society by allowing a aggressive dictatorship to control your free speech. It starts, 他们就变相 TikTok 开始的时候就是 fun little videos and these things. Now it is the major source of news for people who use it. 小红书 will be similar. It starts as little useful things, but then will become a major source of disinformation. And even though the people who put their content on are regular citizens from Taiwan, the point is Beijing can control and manipulate whether that content goes viral or whether it gets suppressed to the point that it almost doesn't exist. So this is not a free speech device. This is an anti-free speech device. Xi Jinping Xi Jinping had a conversation. It was a study group, a study session for the Politburo in 2021, where he talked about the internet being the main battlefield for winning the global majority. And the People's Daily later published an article about that and said TikTok.
Mm.
So it was short-form video apps that they view as an information warfare weapon. So we have to take that very seriously.
Okay, so I think the last part of the question is I want to talk about the American politics, okay? I think that let's just talk about, Trump.
Well, look, the American strategy on the really important things tends to be fairly consistent. I mean, American policy towards Taiwan has been pretty consistent going all the way back to the 1970s, the late 1970s. And President Trump's policy or his attitude about Taiwan that he's been, when he's asked about it, is to maintain some reserve about what he would do and what he wouldn't do. That's consistent with most U.S. presidents. Now, President Biden went further than that. He said, I will commit U.S. forces to defend Taiwan. I like that. I think that that's a good statement. I hope that President Trump, if he's reelected, at least internally, will have that same viewpoint and maybe even state that publicly. I don't know for sure. I don't speak for him. What I can share is that when I worked for him for 4 years, his attitudes about Taiwan became more and more serious in terms of his understanding of how important Taiwan's security is to American security. So I think that people should have some sense of reassurance based on that fact. If you look at the people who worked for President Trump on his national security team, in his first term, you had a lot of friends of Taiwan. You had people who were very deeply committed to the belief that Taiwan was critical to American security in the event that China were to attack, that this would be a terrible affront to America's standing and credibility and security and prosperity. And so I think some of those people will probably be back in a second Trump term. And this should also be reassuring to people in Taiwan.
So, we are talking about, I think, the U.S. probably has the will to help us. But sometimes I have to wonder, because, you guys are dealing with a lot of fronts right now.
Yeah.
Israel, Ukraine, and then, also you have to worry about Taiwan. So especially like this time in Ukraine, they are already have a shortage of ammunitions.
Yes.
So is that, Americans' production, could it really match this demand?
Absolutely. It's just that we are not organized to do that properly. This is why I said, 我的书最激烈的骂的就是美国. It doesn't have to be this way. Let me give an example. I'll see if I get the statistics here right. You can double check me. I think that the Russian economy is about $2 trillion, US dollars. The economies of the United States and its NATO allies is something like $40 trillion or more. It's ridiculous that we should think that we cannot produce enough munitions or do so in a cost-effective way to deal with Russia's puny economy. We can defeat that. We just need to actually pursue the right policies that will incentivize more efficient, cheaper, and more plentiful manufacturing. We have let our defense industrial base grow old and sclerotic. We can reverse that. It's simply that the model is broken. If we fix the model, it will be a disaster for the Russians and for the Iranians and, frankly, even for Beijing, because we can actually produce these munitions much faster than we're doing right now.
Okay, but how about the Congress? Because in the Congress, I have to say that the aid package to Ukraine, it doesn't seem well. I mean, Ukrainian people are fighting at the front lines and are waiting for this money and this ammunitions, all this support, but the Congress is like debating about, just like, I think from our point of view, this is very scary. Okay, so would it happen to us too?
Look, I would have liked to have seen that legislation in Congress pass faster, but it did pass. In the end, we're a democracy too. Democracy's hard. Sometimes decisions are slow. Sometimes, like Winston Churchill used to say, we try, we eventually do the right thing, but after we try, every other alternative first. But we got there. We got more aid to Ukraine. That has alleviated the sense of crisis or shortage on the front of their battlefield. It reminds me of something else, which is that confidence is contagious. Remember when Vladimir Putin first did his full-blown invasion in February of 2022, the world didn't have a lot of confidence in Ukraine. Putin clearly thought that it would collapse quickly. Americans thought that it would collapse quickly. I think most Europeans didn't have a great deal of confidence. But what happened? The Ukrainian people stood up and fought for their freedom and for their sovereignty. And that had a absolutely pivotal effect in drawing in support from around the world. The support, even though we had that slow vote in Congress earlier this year, it eventually came. The Europeans were continuing to provide support. You've seen support coming from as far away as South Korea, which is providing munitions to the Europeans so that the Europeans are able to send their munitions to fight against the Russian aggressors. So if Taiwan demonstrates confidence in its own ability to deter or repel an invasion, it will have an electrifying effect, a catalyzing effect in causing other countries to more rapidly come to its defense.
I like talking to you. You sound so optimistic, I mean, a positive tone about this.
Look, we should remember that we've seen people like Xi Jinping before. We saw his like in the 20th century. He admires Joseph Stalin. If we had all just laid down in the world, Joseph Stalin would have conquered the planet. We've seen people like this before, and we've dealt with them when we took the steps we needed to take to deter. The Cold War offers us a good model because no one wants to fight a Cold War, but it is so much better than the alternative. The Cold War actually was a successful example of deterrence. We shouldn't be fearful of these things. Be not afraid. That is not the same thing as them controlling. Taiwan has the ability, individuals in Taiwan have the choice whether to use TikTok or to trust democratic platforms and democratic forms of media. So we don't have to just be, 自卑或者悲观, right? We should be confident that we can defeat these forms of aggression and evil, frankly, because we've done it before.
好啦，今天非常谢谢你啊，祝你的书大卖 ，OK？
Thank you.
OK， 好，我们讲一下这个 take away。好，那博明今天讲的哦，我说实在，我印象最深刻，当然就是讲我们前舰那个部分啦。
是因为你心中本来就只想问前舰。
对，我真的觉得，因为这个对我们来讲是马上这个是非常重要一个政策啊，哈。然后他的建议，他的想法啦，哈，其实就钱嘛。然后我就其实很简单讲，就是钱嘛。那我们盖前舰不是说不好，也不用去辩论说它是不是这个不对称作战，它就是很贵嘛。那你很贵的情况之下，你是不是你我说实在，就像那个总长李喜明总长常常讲的，他就说你很多钱，你大把银子，你爱怎么撒怎么撒，但是现在你就资源有限嘛，
时间有限，
对，时间有限的情况之下，你是不是要做最有效的运用？然后我觉得在博明他们的分析里面，就是觉得潜舰这个东西 不是很有效率。我觉得，然后那个还讲到就是说，比如说这个钱啊，不要一直想说你已经花了多少钱，你应该想说你将来可以省多少钱。
那个在经济学上就是个沉没成本嘛，但其实重点就是你接下来的钱到底是哪一个东西有效？那他们的说法是，这个博明他们的说法是认为说，这种水上无人载具啊，这种无人机啊、反舰飞弹啊东西是会比花很多钱去造潜舰来的更有效率，这是他们的说法啦。
对，好，那这是，然后另外一个呢，就是他讲到中国的这个航母那一段，我也觉得非常的有趣，因为每一次呢讲到这个中国的海军的时候，大家哇，我觉得这是一面倒的讲说中国的海军现在多强啦，它的吨位多大啦哦。可是博明呢，我觉得他讲了一句话，真的突破盲肠，他马上就讲。现在modern warfare 就是要很多很小很便宜的武器，你一直去发展一个吨位很大的航母，根本就是反潮流的做法 ，OK？ 所以巴不得他们就你尽量往这个方向去发展好了，因为他根本就觉得这是一个错误的方向，我觉得那一点也非常有趣 ，OK？ 好。那另外就是讲到川普的部分，好，我觉得讲到川普的部分，我觉得他做官的那一面就出来了，就讲了四平八稳的，非常的保守这样。你有没有这感觉？
还可以，但是他就讲说几件事嘛，他就讲说，因为我们其实以台湾的角度来说，第一个担心就是川普嘛，第二个担心是国会，那他就讲这个川普的部分，他就说前朝的人有一部分呢也会在新的国安团队里面，那再加上这个4年之间，川普总统对台湾的安全攸关美国的在这个西太平洋地区的生存这件事有一定的认识，所以他认为这是一个保证。那我会觉得这个保证听起来相对来说有点薄。那比方说国会，他就说那个最终我们最后还是通过了嘛，我们是民主社会，所以每一个错的东西我们都会试，但最终我们会做出一个正确的一个决定。那我会觉得，可是
你们在那边试的时候，
你们在试的时候
死了多少人呢？
确实，就这件事情其实对盟邦会不会有疑虑呢？我觉得是会有疑虑的。那这东西当然就是讲的比较保守。那当然，因为博明先生他也不在朝内，所以他其实也坦白讲，你要他去负责或是干嘛，其实也没有办法苛求他做这件事情。
可是我觉得这就是一个现实嘛，还有政治现实这样子，就是大家就是要deal with it， 你要面对这样子。好，那换你讲一下你最重要的 take away。
那另外一件事就是讲到我们其实一开始在问嘛，台湾到底为什么要是台湾？其实他讲得很清楚了，就台湾作为是中国会去选择第一岛链上最弱的一个点。那从他的角度来看，可能台湾就是他认为最弱也最有理由跟正当性去突破的一个口。那他甚至也讲到，其实习近平不管在对内讲话或是解放军自己的规划里面，其实未来如果他们占领台湾，都会把台湾当成一个基地嘛，因为显然他们就是希望突破第一岛链。把军事力量投射到西太平洋，然后让这个民主，就是可以对附近的民主国家产生威慑力。其实这是中国真正画的好大一盘棋。那第二个，其实我觉得讲到一件事情，就像范姐一开始讲，为什么要讲威慑？为什么要讲这个 deterrence？ 其实最终的是你要展现出打我你会受伤。那重点是在于，虽然它很不舒服，虽然它很贵，可它还是真的比真正发生战争的时候，你什么都不准备，发生战争的代价来得轻很多。我觉得这个是，我觉得这是最强而有力的一个讯息，这样子。
好，那最后面其实我想谈一谈就是说，他也有提到就是 TikTok 的问题嘛，哈，就是我们在打资讯战的这一块这样子。我其实，在听他讲的时候，我就觉得。我们都觉得 TikTok 很不好，然后这资讯是很破碎化。可是我其实是想不出来，真的有我真的看不出来，我们真的有办法阻挡吗？这个是做得到的吗？就目前来讲，我觉得很多国家都在做，可是我觉得都做不怎么成功。现在看看美国吧，美国现在说要一定的 ownership 要过渡到美国啊，那真的
机房要落地。
对，然后这个东西真的有办法改变 TikTok 目前造成的问题吗？哈，这个我们就看看美国怎么做吧。但是在讨论这个问题的时候，我其实就想到，就是在这个过程里面啊，我想到的是我们媒体的责任啊。我们媒体的责任其实这2天因为那个 AIT 的主席现在已经前主席孙小雅，
我们之前访问过他，
对，我们访问过他，然后他要离开台湾了嘛，哈，那在离开台湾之前，他就给台湾一个建议，他就讲到说，面对中国的威胁的，不管是言语或行动的时候，不要 panic 啊，你不要 hysteria， 你不要歇斯底里，但是也不可以 complacency， 意思就是说你也不能变得麻木不仁，所以这在hysteria 跟这 complacency 当中，我们必须要找一个平衡点这样子。可是我们就讲说，我们媒体的责任，我常常就觉得说， 我不知道，我说实在，我有时候常常在挣扎一点，就是说，我们当然希望我们讨论的议题是被讨论的，但是我真的也不知道我们是不是有增加了这个 hysteria。OK， 这是我在想的部分。比如说，我觉得最近我就是要再讲一次这个事情，就是国会改革法案这件事情，我的确有不同的意见。我对于这个法案写的这个过程跟里面的一些内容，我的确是有意见，但我的确是支持国会改革的。可是现在呢，就有很多人在讲啊，范琪斐就是反对国会改革，而且呢，我觉得更夸张的是，就是直接给你贴上说是绿营侧翼这个标签，这样。我那时候一直在想说，为什么他们要做这件事情？可是这2天我在想，就是说，因为他就是把这个 hysteria 升高嘛，他把今天我们一个自媒体，说实在，我们跟民进党没什么关系，可是他今天把它贴上绿营标签之后，我们是绿营侧翼的标签之后，这就变成党派之争，它就升级了。可是也不是只有蓝白这边在这样做，事实上我们看到绿营这边也一样在做，比如说国会改革法案，它就是一个我们在讨论我们台湾自己的国会怎么样改革，它直接把它升级，它就是说这个是比如说共产党的阴谋啊，就是说，我觉得这些东西都没有帮助。我真的我在看的时候都没有帮助。我觉得大家应该要更集中自己的焦点一点来看，我们真正在讨论这个议题。民主很乱很慢。所以我们如果要再把这个眼前看的这个问题，你又要把它扩得更大，你是不是更难解决呢？所以这是我在想的时候，我是真的在想，我们还有多少空间可以做这件事情？
我是觉得那就是一个抢眼球嘛，就是做政治的一定会觉得说啊，这东西很重要，可是他们要跟很多议题，比方说这人的生活里面不是就政治，可能有娱乐，可能有这个经济，可能有这个各式各样的东西，那大家必须要把这东西讲得非常夸张、非常危险、非常危言耸听。简单来说就是 sensationalism， 他要去抢这东西，他才可以抢到一点话语权，跟大家来关注。可是然后所以大家每个人都在用这种情绪动员，然后去希望你来留言，然后来关注。可是我觉得就是 cold shoulder， 就是你就冷淡看待。我觉得其实真正我不知道为什么，就是观众我很多留言的观众会觉得啊，留言观众风向的跟我一样，所以这个一定都是我们在开倒车，就是拜托 get some life， 去走到生活里面去看看到底有多少人像你们这样子是很激进。我觉得面对这种渲染，我觉得反而最好应对的方式就是什么都不要做。你就是会有一群人真的他们会想要看的时候，他们会来讨论。我觉得观众是聪明的，观众知道真正资讯在哪边，那标签要怎么贴，然后要怎么留言，什么直觉，什么 whatever， 随便你们。
对，所以我是很希望啦，就是说我们台湾的社会不是只有我们，我觉得温和中间的声音，我希望它会在因为我一直就觉得这个社会现在越来越极端，也不是只有我们台湾，我们最近才写了一个在讲那个斯洛伐克，但他们也越来越极端，就是不是只有大国的这个问题，其实很多那个小国家也有这个问题所以我觉得这个很极端的这两边的声音，就是要靠中间的这个中间温和派把他们粘在一起。所以我真的很希望我是希望我们是可以留在这里啦。可是我的经验，我看到美国的经验就是，最终你就是会被推到某一边去这样子。OK， 我们大家互勉之吧。在这个目前这个很混乱的情况里面，我希望大家能够尽量的保持冷静的头脑。好，那我们今天就讨论到这里了。好，那大家对于我们讲的博明讲的有什么意见的话，非常欢迎留言告诉我们。喜欢我们的节目的话，应该要
按赞订阅分享，
谢谢大家。